The manatee, I created this manatee named Booger, who's incredibly stupid, because they are.
Right.
No offense to manatee lovers, which I don't think there's probably a lot of here in Arizona. But, you know, I made it into a kind of a dumb, you know, it figures into the plot, but by, like, chapter 6, it's Lassie, you know? I mean, it's saving drowning kittens, it's pulling people ashore.
Like, it turned into a monster, didn't it?
Manatees don't do that, you
right.
know? But there's, like, all these, so anyway, so this huge, roiling, confused mass of a plot gets to Elmore Leonard, and what does he do? First of all, he doesn't read it. He has his research assistant, a guy named Greg, very smart guy, read the whole thing. Guy does all of Elmore Leonard's research and summarizes the plot. He looks at it, realizes right away there's no way he's going to solve it. So he writes a set-piece chapter using a character I had created back in the first chapter, and who had sort of dropped out of sight for a while. Set-piece chapter for him, which doesn't in any way address any of the complicated questions in the plot. And he leaves 2 bodies on the ground, and he says to Carl, I left you 2 bodies, they can be whoever you want. So he did that much, but then he turned the whole mass over to Carl. So poor Carl had, and this is why Carl's a great writer, had to take all of this,
right.
tie it all up, explain all the inconsistencies, explain why the manatee suddenly became brilliant, and resolve it. And he did. I mean, then Carl and Elmore Leonard and I went to New York when Putnam's published for the single funniest book tour I've ever been on in my life, because there were 3 of us. That made it fun. We all get along really well. That made it fun. None of us took this book very seriously.
Clearly not.
And 2 of us, Dutch and I, had not really read it all the way through at that point. Only Carl had, because he had to.
Because he had to.
So by like the 5th interview, like I remember we were on the Charlie Rose show or something, and like every question that he'd ask, we'd all just, like 3 grown men, just collapse in giggles. That was a wonderful book tour. But anyway, was I answering a question, or I'm just blithering here at this point?
No, well, my real question was, how did you
I was going to say the ground rules.
A whole novel, right, but you were talking about the ground rules.
The ground rules, if you're ever going to write a serial novel, ground rule says you should not introduce new characters, you should not be able to, radically, the plot you have to respect the plot that's been built, I think. There's something you would do with your own book, and to make this really work, you ought to do that with somebody else's book. Not that it comes up that often. But
well, no, but for you, it's actually going to come up again because here I have a cheat sheet, A Putt at the End of the World, published by Warner for Father's Day 2000. Is this a golf book?
Yes, it is. Les Standiford called me up and said he was doing a golf book, and he wanted to know if I would write a chapter. And I said, I hate golf, and I don't know anything about it. I mean, I don't really hate it, I just don't get it. And let me, stand
Living
there.
In Florida?
Yeah. It makes it even harder to get it. Especially when they watch the highlights on TV. Here's a highlight, shh. Here's another highlight, shh. And I cannot tell, So anyway.
It's a little slow for you.
And a little like, I know it's hard. I know it's really, really hard. So is oral surgery. And I don't really want to watch that on television either.
Maybe when you write Dave Berry turns 60,
then I'll be
a little clearer.
Yeah, that maybe so.
Anyway, I'll put at the end of the
Put at the end of the world. So I said, okay, I would do it, even though, I said, I don't know anything about golf, but I'll do it if that's, it's okay that I don't really understand golf. And he said, yeah. And so I wrote my chapter. I think I was chapter 7, and passed it on. I don't know where it is now.
They knew better than to give you the lead off.
I would have killed everybody. A bomb goes off and golf is destroyed forever. But it did have every major world figure, plus Bruce Springsteen, all meeting at this this castle in Scotland for some giant golf tournament, and this plot, whoa, is complicated, at least as far as I saw. And I thought I came up with a really good way to you always think your idea for where the plot should go is the best, and then the next person immediately just took it somewhere else. So
well, you only have to tee off in chapter 7 and get to the green, and then
That's
somebody
right.
else has to drive it home. So it ought to be fun. You're working on this with who? Ridley Pearson?
Ridley, Les, and all the name. I'm blanking on the name. There were a lot of good people.
There aren't enough books, which I'm sure Dave Berry's humor novels fill. But there are not enough books that are just fun at the moment, in my view. And maybe that's the reason that Naked King the Manatee struck such a chord.
Yeah.
It was fun for you. It was fun for us, too.
I agree. I mean, people like to be amused. And there was a wonderful tradition of amusing, fiction in this country, well, really everywhere, for a long time. And it sort of drifted away, like maybe like Max Schulman and a few other people after him, but nothing like when there was P.G. Wodehouse and
Mark Twain even.
Mark Twain, yeah. And although you could argue, had a serious dark side too. But I mean, people who are just trying to be. I mean, I always think of myself as, I don't even like the term novel, really. I would just like to say, it's a story. Because when you say novel, you like immediately think Jane Eyre, or at least you're writing the same kind of thing. And I'm not. I'm not trying to, and I know I couldn't anyway. So.
How did you get into writing your humor?
I have no useful skills.
You needed employment.
Yeah, I mean,
Did you start out to be a journalist?
I didn't start out to be anything. I was not a driven, goal-oriented person. When I got out of college, I had no clue. I liked to write, so I thought if I could do something that would be writing, that would be fun. I had written humor columns for my high school and college newspapers.
You grew up in New York, right?
I grew up in suburban New York City. I went to Pleasantville High School in Pleasantville, New York, and Haverford College in suburban Philadelphia, where my son just started as a freshman. But I was an English major. It was the 60s. I was drifting around. I didn't know or care, really. And when I had to get a job, I applied for a job at a newspaper. Even though I had very little newspaper experience, I'd worked summers as an intern at Congressional Quarterly, which is a magazine in Washington, D.C. That was the closest I'd come to formal journalism training. Back then, you could get a job. I got hired by a little newspaper in suburban Philadelphia to be a general assignment reporter. So first day I was taking obituaries, being sent to meetings, fires, police, all that stuff that you do at in a little newspaper.
The sort of groundwork of any journalist's career, really.
Right, and it was the best thing in the world. I mean, I get letters a lot from people who want to be humor columnists, but they all say they don't want to be reporters. They want to be humor columnists, and I always say it's really good practice, and I mean it's good training to be a reporter first. You'll be a better columnist if you know what it is you're making fun of, the business. And you'll also, I mean, there's like simple things like accuracy. Even if you're writing inaccurate statements, which I do all the time, you have to know they're inaccurate, and you have to, know how to. You have to know what the truth is to write lies. So.
You also have to hit deadlines. I think one of the hardest things for people who don't write is to think somehow, it's you wait for the muse, you wait for your inspiration or whatever it is, and the real truth is, in the real world, you grind it out, right? Whether inspiration's on your shoulder or not.
I've said this a million times to people who would like to write, I say, and what exactly is stopping you? You're absolutely right. If you sit around and wait until you feel like writing, you will never, ever, ever be a writer. The people I know who are writers write all the time, write compulsively, force themselves to write even when they don't feel like it, and that's how they write. And I've always felt that skill and intuition about words are way less important than discipline in writing. I know people who are not great writers, are not even close, who are successful and give their readers something good, something they want, because they work so hard at it and they're willing to do it.
And they get some help too from editors and other people. I've seen a lot of manuscripts from very well-known authors in their raw form.
They're not so great sometimes.
No, you can see where they really need polishing by the editorial staff in order to come out with a product that everybody would be really happy with. I would think writing nonfiction would be really good training too, rather than just trying to plunge into fiction where you're always worried about, can I find a story? Nonfiction, the story suggests itself right there, and you don't have to worry about plot. You can concentrate on all this other good stuff.
Absolutely, and as you say, journalism is good training just because of the deadlines, because you just crank it out. You have to do it. There's never going to be an excuse to not do it. You can never say, I don't feel like writing. I don't have a good story yet. The paper will come out, and you have to have something in it. That's why I think newspaper writers who write books tend to write a lot more.
Sure.
They're just used to it, and I think sometimes novelists with a capital N have a tendency to write a book and then, take some time, stretch it out.